Next up, we're going to create a form asset. Form asset is the forms you see across the website where people enter their information in fields, submit it, and it goes to the intended party. These may look pretty intimidating when you see on a site, like, wow, those are fancy. And they are kind of neat and fancy to look at, but they're very actually easy to construct and use. So I'm going to put a form here on my standard content page. And when I'm building a form for a page, I will usually do it in a separate tab. I'll leave the page I intend it to be on open on the side. So I don't have to flip back and forth between a bunch of different pages and places to get to it. I'm going to click the contents tab up here at the top. And I have assets as the second one. I'm going to right click on that and open link in new tab. That's going to take us into the asset engine. That's where all the form assets live, among other assets. The two most used assets across OmniCMS are the form asset and the image gallery assets. So you'll see here, I'm in just the general assets, and you'll notice that the structure is a bit different from what you see in OmniCMS's directories. You don't need underlines in the file names, for one thing, and there's no directories. Everything that's an asset just lives in one giant lump of content within here, so you don't go digging through. On the other hand, that makes things a little more complex because these things add up over time, and you have to be a little smarter in your filter usage. Give your assets the most specific name you can. For example, there are a lot of registration forms for a lot of different events across the site. And if you called it registration form, we'll just type the word registration. We've got a number of things here that are registration. So be specific with it about the event, the date of the event, maybe use these things in the name as you're setting it up so that when you use the filter, it pops up right and ready for you if you're looking up your asset in here to edit. So we want a new one. And like we've seen earlier, we have a big new button that gives us a big pop-up with our different options. And we've also got a down arrow that has a drop down with our options. I'm going to select form. Okay, so now we're in the form asset engine here where we can create our form. Note here, new form, asset info, such and such. This is a lot like the property tabs on a web page. Basically, these are the 5 processes we're going to go through to create a form. And I'm going to call this something virtual form. Maybe I call it Jeremy Virtual Omni form. And I didn't have to put the underspaces in there. It's just habit. Description, that's just like on a web page, put in a description. If you want to, you can put tags in it if you want to, just like the web pages. Lock to site is automatically checked. Basically locks it to only be used on the Wichita State University web pages. You don't have to worry about that. It shouldn't be an option for you. It should automatically be checked. Access settings. So this may be important to you if you're worried about security. Honestly, most people don't set these because by default, most anybody doesn't want to mess with anyone else's forms. But the access group are the group who are able to edit this asset. So if you only wanted to lock this down to your access group for your pages, you could. And available to everyone. That's who can use the asset or put the asset on their page. So for example, if Human Resources had a form that they wanted proliferated throughout the Wichita State University webpage as a survey or something, and they could leave this set to everyone. And after they created the form and set it to only they would be able to edit it, they could have it available to everyone. Send out an email asking everyone to place the asset on their pages, like on, say, their main page of their department. Everyone could do that and everybody could use it, but only they could get in and edit it. Now, like I say, most people just leave these to everyone because no one really has any interest on messing with anybody else's forms. But you do have the option if you want to lock those down. Next thing, we come to the elements. The elements are the form elements themselves, the interactive elements that make up the form. And we can do this by, we're going to make something really generic here. based on pretty much any form you ever see, but we're going to use a sampling of the form elements. You'll see here on the right side, form elements. These are the different elements that you can use to make up your form. We've got single line text field. Single line text field is one line with an input. So we could click that. And this is our single line text field. Our label is what it's going to say to the user that they're to fill out. So in this case, we might do first name. I hit tab and note that underneath it in name, it populates first name, no caps, no spaces. So name is not what appears on the page. Label is what will appear on the page. Name is a element that in HTML and XML code is referred to as an ID. And we're not going to wade too much into the technical details on it, but this specific field, the specific form element, will have an ID labeled to it in the code. In this case, the ID will be the word first name, no spaces. So one of the things that is very important in terms of avoiding errors with your pages is for anything that has an ID to not have the same ID as another ID on the page. That will create a conflict and the page will refuse to publish for you. So to put this into context, there are groups out there who have, say, monthly dinners or monthly meetings or something. They require a monthly registration form, but they don't want to create 12 different forms, so to speak. And they ask for the same information on every form. So there have been cases where people will go, instead of making separate forms 12 times and dropping them in the pages or making 12 different pages, I'm just going to create a series of accordions. The accordions can have a heading of the month date, and I'm going to drop the same form in each one of those. So they create the form one time, and they put in each accordion the same form. And they save it, and they think they've been pretty clever, and they go to publish it, and the page refuses to publish accessibility error, OU campus ID something. And it's not really obvious when you first see the error what its issue is. It just says OU campus ID something. If you've seen the error and dealt with it before, you'll recognize it. But other than that, it's usually OmniCMS ID error or something like that. That's because while they've used that same form 12 times on the page, they have 12 IDs that are the same. First name, first name, first name, first name. And the system reads that sort of like if you were to take two physical objects and try to put them in the exact same place in space and time, so to speak. They can't do that. You can't have two things coexisting in the same space. It thinks of it sort of as the same thing, so it doesn't allow it. So this is basically an instant error. And so the resolution for that is normally to either create different forms, and because you can always go through after you do this, while I hit first name and tab down, it said first name. If I had a second one, I can always add a 2 on it and make the rest of my form with that number 2 at the end of each of these fields. And then it won't conflict with the other one. Another thing about these is a lot of forms have very similar details, even if they're not the same. Most every form, no matter what it's asking for from the user, at some point asks for first name, last name, email address, my WSU ID. And so you might have 2 completely different forms, but because they had those 4 fields in them, and you didn't think to go through and change the name on those fields, you end up with that error again. And once they're set like that, you can't go into the code and change them. What you would have to do is come back into one of the forms, delete out the field element using this X up here, and rebuild them. So it saves you a lot of time and effort if you keep that straight in the beginning, and be sure to assign out different ones like that. Don't use the same form multiple times on the page. It will error out on you. So that said, we've got first name here, helper text. Helper text is a prompt telling them what you're asking for. In this case, please enter first name is good. Default text not applicable. Please leave field blank. And that's something sort of along those lines. Required, does the user have to provide this information or not? Required is yes, it will not let them submit the form until they've answered this question. If you have it unchecked, they don't have to provide this. This can be important because sometimes people will put things in that they don't necessarily need from the person but want. And if somebody doesn't fill it out, it won't send the form in. Maybe they don't have whatever it's asking for. I'll make first name required. Failure message, this field is required, is basically what it says on the tin. It's going to tell them when they don't fill it out and try to proceed, hey, this field is required. You need to fill it out. Got the validation here, email address, minimum length, irregular expression. And all of these will have an advanced. Advanced is a space for a specific database coding. This is usually done by strategic communication, so it's not something you'd really want to mess with. So we've got a first name here. And we'll do another single line text field. Last name. Same thing, got last name here. I'm not going to give it helper text because it's pretty obvious. Required. Now say we want their street address, and street addresses or mailing address. Mailing address is a little more complicated, it has more than one line. Our next form element is multi-line text field. Mailing address. Like so. And what this does is it's the same as the first one, but they can enter more than one lines of information. This would be the good one, for example, say in 350 words what you liked about this program, something that requires a bit more writing than just, you know, a quick line or two. It'll work there. Required. Our next item over here is radio buttons. Radio buttons are singular choices, either or. You cannot pick more than one choice and you can't have no choice. You have to have a choice. So in this case, I can put yes or no. Under items, I will add. The first one will be yes. The second one will be no. The user can pick one or the other, not both, and not none. I'll require that. Checkboxes. Checkboxes allow them to pick any, all, or none. Today, tomorrow, and or Wednesday. They can pick all three of those. They can pick two of those. They can do whatever. Under items, I'll add today, tomorrow, Wednesday. Make it required. Drop down. This is basically a fancy version of the radio selector, but instead of them selecting the box, it populates a drop down that they can select from the choices. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Add our items, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Required. Preview is basically the first thing it's going to show in the drop-down list so that there's some word there that they can use. You can change it. If you would prefer Sunday to appear instead of Friday, you could do that by doing that. Multi-select isn't used very often because it's multi-dimensional and it kind of complicates things and the users may be confused. Date time picker. You could, of course, set up a single line text field asking them what a date is, provide a format, example, and so on and so forth. But this way they can just pick it on a calendar. What is today's date? Format is currently set to date and time. I'll just change that to date. Is there a default date time? I don't necessarily have to put one. I'll make it required. Instructional text. Instructional text allows you to enter basically text of some kind, and instructional is what it says by default, but it doesn't have to necessarily be instructional. The thing is if you have a form and you have the form elements that make up the form, and let's say you, for whatever reason, have some content that's not form fields that has to go in the middle. If you were to do this without use of the instructional text thing, you might have to create two different forms because it can't do regular page content between. What instructional text allows you to do is put regular page content between. So in this is instructional text. That allows you to put text in between there like that. And you've got some formatting options here. You can expand them out with the more options button here. You see hyperlinks, copy paste, email address links, various formatting tools and whatnot. And finally, file upload. Have a file to share. I've seen this used mainly for Fine Arts has done this, so people could have submissions for their art pieces submitted to, say, JPEGs. You can use helper text there if you needed to. You can set a file size limit. It's set to default of kilobytes. You can set it to megabytes. Maybe we want to limit it to 10 meg. File extensions. These are you're setting the type of file that the user is allowed to send. Note, disallow these extensions is going to block certain files from being uploadable. Allow these extensions will allow them to be. I want to allow, in this case, I might allow JPEG, PNG, bitmap. Bitmaps would be huge, but GIF. Those are some common image file types. I could allow only those extensions. Is required? I'm not going to make it required because I may not have a file to send. Failure message, please use files that are less than 10 meg. Basically, if their file's too big. So we've got our form fields in place. Now we got to set, once they submit it, where those files are going to go to. So under email messages here, I'm going to click add. And maybe I want them to come to me. Put the email address of whoever you want it to go to. And who's it from? So one common thing is people will put no reply like this. But another element is if you use, for example, I use Outlook. And for a lot of emails from different people, I've used create rule so that the emails don't end up in just the general inbox. It's like, say, if my manager sends me an email, it will redirect his email to a specific box that I have set aside for him. And so that way his stuff is separate from everybody else's. And I know if he sent something else, it doesn't get lost in the din of email I get throughout the day. So I could go, and you can totally use a fictional email address as long as it ends in at wichita.edu. I might put Omni registration like that at wichita.edu. And then when they come in, I can have a create rule set up that any email I get from omni.registration@wichita.edu goes into that folder. It doesn't matter if that email address actually exists. It's only reading the email address. Subject line. You can set the subject line, Omni registration. So you know specifically what it is. And that's another thing you can use create rule for. If you wanted to add some kind of content to the body before it shows you the submission results, you could. Include all submitted values. So note that this is not checked. Throughout this course, you probably notice that there's a lot of stuff that OmniCMS does by default that kind of makes using it easier. This is one of them that kind of goes against that. So include all submitted values means that do you want all of the information the person entered into the form to be included in the email? In other words, if you don't check this box, when somebody registers and sends that in, you're going to get a blank email. So you want to check that to make sure you get all of those. Now you may want to have more than one recipient of your forms, and that's fine. Just click add. and you're given a second box to enter in more than one person. So we've got this filled out. Form settings, success message. You can have a text success message. You can also have a URL redirect, which means they complete, they submit, and once it comes through, it's going to redirect them to another web page. I'm going to leave it on text here. This is the message you'll get. Thank you for your submission. We'll hear from us soon. Failure message. So this failure message is not the same thing as they didn't fill out a field. The failure message is more, they were working on the form, they clicked submit on the form, and there was a server interruption or some technical thing happened. Their Wi-Fi went down, who knows? But the point is the information didn't go through. And this reports to them in that way. Commonly, I'll put something like this. Sorry, something went wrong. Let's try again. Save results in database. We'll show you the database here in a bit, but for the moment here, that's automatically checked and it can't be unchecked. So you just leave it the way it is. Submission button text. If you don't fill this out, the default text is going to show is submit, but you can change this to something else if you want. I've got register. You could sure use register there and it could say that instead. And advanced once more is a specific database coding. So we've got all of our elements in place. So now we're going to click create. And it's going to create our form. It's going to give us a bit of a preview of it, though this isn't actually how it's going to look on a page. And just like a web page, we need to publish it. And I'll note it as initial publication. If I can get the T to show up right. There we go. My poor keyboard. So the form has been published. So let's go put it on our page. And click main content here. And I'm going to put it underneath our accordions here. I'm going to click the asset button, which is this box with the arrows pointing in a clockwise manner. And like I said, they are all in one giant lump, so we need to find it. I know I had the word virtual in it. Not going to do it. See what I meant by that? So we'll put Jeremy. There's my virtual Omni course. Now, one thing is sometimes it will show the same thing more than once in here. Like, for example, Jeremy 1234, Jeremy 1234. That's not two separate things. It's actually one thing. It's just a weird little thing that the system does. You could click on either of these and it would populate it just fine. So I'm going to grab virtual Omni course form. It'll give me a little bit of a preview. Insert. And like we saw on the WYSIWYG toolbar, I've got just this little bar. It doesn't show me the actual form here. I'm going to click save. And gives me a preview of what the form will look like on the page. So let's go ahead and publish it. Version description. Don't forget to use those. Publish. Now I'm going to go over to my live page. And let's fill it out. First name, Jeremy. Webster. Mailing address, 12345 6th Street. City, Kansas. Yes or no? And I can either choose yes or no. I can't choose both. Yes. Today, tomorrow, Wednesday. I can select all three. I can select two. I can select none. I'll select today. Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. Here's our drop down. Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. I'll select Sunday. What is today's date? I'll select that. You see it brings up a calendar and the user can just select whatever they want to on the calendar. Like so. Do I have a file to share? If I did have a file to share, when I choose this, it's going to give me a directory view. or I can pick a file if I want to. I don't, and it's not required, so I'm not going to. Click register. I get the message, thank you for your submission. You will hear from us soon. And an email verification of that came to my inbox with the details. Now, and you probably just heard that bong. That was that email getting here. Forms are that simple. Now, in a lot of cases, people are set up with forms that they collect registrations or submissions for a very long period of time. And at some point they go, I don't want to wade through all these separate emails. I wish there was a way that I could just access this as a spreadsheet and get it over with. You can. So let's go back and look at our form again. I've got to check it out. Notice at the top, there's a tab that says form submissions. I'm going to click that. When I do, it's going to show me the submission details going back. Now, one thing that's notable here is there's an ID number and it starts at 2 here. And for a lot of forms that get a lot of registrants, we get a lot of questions about these numbers in the ID because they tend to do things like skip 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, or 2, 3, 4, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's skips in there. And people are often concerned that because they skip like that, that they're missing out on registrations that have occurred. No, they haven't. It's an ID number. It's actually not a listing of the chronological order of the registration. So if you see that, you don't have to worry about that. It's not a problem. If you want this as a spreadsheet, you want to go up here to the right. There's a button that says Export CSV. Click that. CSV is a basic spreadsheet file type, much like a TXT file. You could open a TXT file in Word. You could open a TXT file in Pages or Google Docs. It's just a generic file type. Once you have downloaded this, and it'll go to your download folder, like you see here, you can open that file and say, if you use Excel, open that CSV. It will open it as a spreadsheet and you will have your spreadsheet good to go. If you do something like a yearly event where you take different registrants every year and you don't want to keep all of this information forever and ever, you want to reset it every year. What you would want to do is when you're done collecting and your event has happened, you can choose delete all and it will delete all the registrant information out of here. But be sure you don't want it anymore, because once you delete all, you cannot bring them back. My recommendation will always be, before you do that delete all, to export CSV, because a lot of people like to have those previous lists as mailing lists to promote whatever they've got going on. So say you might open a registration for next year's event. And if you wanted to promote this year's event to last year's attendees, you save that spreadsheet file and you send the promotional emails to them as well using that. And that is Form Assets.